Chapter 3 of Building a Railroad by a Self-Made Man. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3 The Fight at the Foot of the Cliff. "Well," said Don with a dignity that was natural to him, "what have you got to say about this matter anyway?"
"What have I got to say?" said Kelso with a sneer. "I've got a good bit to say. Go home, gal," he added fiercely, turning to Nellie. "If I catch you talking to this chap again, it won't be good for you. Understand?"
"Goodbye, Don Winthrop," said Nellie, giving him her hand, which trembled visibly in his grasp. "Goodbye, Nellie," Don answered, without making any attempt to detain her, which he judged would have brought down on her gentle head the anger of her tyrants. The blind girl turned slowly away and began the ascent of the cliff, passing within arm's length of Kelso. Don watched the man like a hawk, fearing he would strike the girl. Had he done so, and his eyes seemed to indicate such an intention, there would have been trouble. Don was in no mood to stand for such an exhibition of brutality, but Jim Kelso allowed Nellie to pass him unharmed. It is possible he scented danger in the young engineer's face and preferred not to provoke a quarrel, strong and rugged as he undoubtedly was. Evidently the man was not looking for a personal encounter at that moment. "Now you can go," he said, turning a malevolent look on the boy. "Can I?" replied Don with a short laugh, which in its way was a sort of danger signal. "Since when have you constituted yourself the arbiter of my movements?"
"None of your blame business. I don't want you hanging around here chinning to that girl. You understand?"
"I wasn't aware that you had any control over this ground," replied Don sarcastically.
"I have control over that gal, and I won't stand for a gent like you putting any nonsense into her head. That's what I mean. You struck my son Jerry 3 weeks ago because he gave the gal a tap on the cheek for talking sassy to him, and I want you to understand that I don't care for you to repeat it."
And Kelso nodded his head in a significant manner. "I struck your son because he was behaving like a brute and refused to desist when I asked him to. He's big and husky enough to defend himself without calling on you." That was quite true, although Jerry Kelso was but 17, but like most bullies, he was a rank coward, and Don knew it.
"What was that gal saying to you when I came up?"
asked Kelso, suddenly changing the subject. "Why do you want to know?" replied Don, looking him squarely in the eye.
"'Cause I reckon it's my business to know," answered the foreman doggedly.
"Well, you won't learn from me."
"Then I'll make her tell me," said Kelso with an ugly scowl.
"And suppose she won't? What then?"
"Don't you worry. I'll find a way to open her mouth," he said significantly.
"Look here, Jim Kelso," said Don, walking squarely up to him. "Do you know what I think of you?"
"No, nor do I care."
"Don't you? Well, I've just got one word to say to you on that subject, and if you know when you're well off, you'll heed what I say. Don't let me hear of you laying the weight of your hand on that girl. I mean it. For as sure as there's a heaven above, I'll teach you a lesson you won't forget as long as you live."
"You'll do what?"
roared the foreman, doubling up his brawny fist. "I'll take it out of your hide, if that's plain enough English."
"Why, I can eat you up, you soft-faced dude,"
ejaculated Kelso furiously.
"You see that arm?"
And he rolled up the sleeves of his red flannel shirt, exposing a great hairy arm which bristled with muscle and sinew.
"If I hit you with that, you'd be a fit subject for the coroner. You understand?"
If Jim Kelso thought this display of his strength would intimidate Don Winthrop, he was greatly mistaken. "I see you've been drinking," said Don coolly, "and I prefer not to have any trouble with you, but—"
"What if I have been drinking? That's my business. If I go up yonder and kick the head off that gal if she won't open up her face when I ask her a question, that's my business too,"
snarled the foreman, squirting a stream of tobacco juice within an inch of the young engineer's shoe. "You'll find out that I'll make it my business if I hear of you doing any harm to her. Why, nobody but a brute would raise his hand against any woman, let alone a little blind girl like Nellie."
"Ah,"
snarled Kelso, showing his tobacco-stained teeth like a famished hyena.
"Have a mind to smash your face for you."
"I've dealt with brutes like you before, so I wouldn't advise you to try it," said the boy with an exasperating coolness.
"Curse you!"
cried the man, flaring up like a flash of gunpowder and thrusting his rough fist within an inch of Don's face.
"If you get me going, I'll wipe the earth with you till there ain't nothing left of you to make a respectable funeral."
"Take your hand away," cried Don sharply without moving a muscle. The ruffian half complied, and then, as though ashamed of his action, he suddenly slapped the boy across the mouth, making the remark,
"Take that for—"
But he got no farther. With a spring, Don planted his fist squarely between the man's eyes, and the fellow fell back in a heap among the rocks. In a moment he sat up and looked around in a dazed sort of way. Then, with an oath, he sprang to his feet. His face was distorted with passion, and blood was trickling from the cut behind his ear where his head had come in contact with a rock.
"I'll kill you for that,"
he shouted hoarsely, rushing at Don, his face convulsed with all the evil instincts of his nature. Smash! The boy leapt aside with the agility of a cat, and at the same time planted a swift hook under the rascal's jaw, which sent his head back with a snap and rattled every tooth in his jaws. The blow stopped him for a second. Then he came at Don like a whirlwind, evidently intending to annihilate him on the spot. But the boy, who was as cool as an iceberg, ducked with wonderful quickness, and as Kelso's fist shot past into the empty air, throwing him partly off his balance, Don turned and hit him with a swinging blow under the left ear, sending the brawny fellow staggering away. No one but an adept at the science of sparring could have handled the muscular foreman with the ease and precision the young engineer displayed.
"You can fight, can you?"
gritted Jim Kelso, now thoroughly aroused to the work cut out for him.
"Let me hit you one blow, and I'll knock it all out of you, quicker'n grease lightning."
This time he came at the boy with more caution, but his blows were parried with wonderful skill, and he got a couple of smashes in the face, either of which would have floored an ordinary man, but in his case they merely stopped him for a moment. In the mix-up which followed, Don received one glancing blow, while he pummeled his opponent right and left in the face and chest. Kelso, now bleeding from a cut in the mouth, looked like a savage as he advanced again, this time fully determined to have his revenge for the punishment he had received.
"I'll have no mercy on you if once I get you in my clutches,"
he snarled with a grim ferocity which boded ill for the boy unless he could keep the ruffian off. Don again clearly ducked a straight one aimed at his head.
Biff!
He opened a second cut on Kelso's lip. With an oath, the foreman recovered himself quickly and struck the boy a staggering blow on the chest that sent him back a yard or two.
"Ah, now I have you,"
roared the ruffian with a triumphant grin, following up his advantage with a blind rush and swinging his arms. But Don was not where Kelso thought he was.
Smash! Crash!
The lad's hard knuckles rattled his jaws again, and the foreman turned fairly livid with disappointed rage. For the next 5 minutes the young engineer seemed to hit the rascal where he pleased without receiving a scratch in return, although the fellow tried his prettiest to land a knockout and took his punishment in grim silence. Kelso's countenance was battered and bloody by this time, but this was no new experience for him. He was as fit to continue the fight as if he had never been struck. Don, too, was in prime condition. He scarcely seemed to be breathing out of the ordinary, in spite of his recent exertions. But his blood was thoroughly up by this time. He also realized that he had a hard proposition on his hands. "I fooled him long enough," he muttered under his breath. "It's time I polished him off if I'm ever going to do it." With this resolve he now assumed the aggressive and went at Kelso like a young cyclone. The change in tactics astonished and confounded the foreman, whose defense was feeble and ineffective. He was staggered by the swings, cuts, and hooks, which seemed to strike him like lightning flashes. Kelso in his blind fury tried to land an effective blow, but not one seemed to reach. Smash! This time Don caught him plumb in the left eye.
Thud!
The boy's left bruised his flat nose.
Biff!
Straight from the shoulder, Don landed on the point of the rascal's jaw. This is what he'd been aiming for. Jim Kelso went down like an ox under the sledgehammer. It was a clean knockout, and the foreman had no further interest in the proceedings. "Well, he's got his medicine at least," said the stalwart young engineer, calmly wiping the blood from his bleeding knuckles while he looked down on his semi-conscious adversary. "And it serves you right, you brute. Let me hear of you touching a hair on Nellie's bright little head, and I'll not leave a feature on your ugly face for your wife to recognize you by." Thus speaking, Don turned on his heel and left the foreman lying where he had fallen, to recover at his own sweet convenience. End of chapter 3.